Okay, so just to start this thing out, I was totally trying to catch those two off guard because they both went to go blow their nose at the same time. So I hit the start button. Well, welcome to the brand new episode of the 5280 podcast on the MHRT Network. I'm your host, Mundungus Creevy, alongside my co-host, as always, Cameron Parker, Glenn Hauser. Gage Madrid is off doing young person things so the old guys can hold it down. And yes, you're part of the old guys, Cam. You're like a year younger than me, so you're old too.
I just happen to have the, what is it? Bennett, what is the guy who is ageless? He's the ageless wonder. I forget what his name
Button?
is. Yeah, Benjamin Button. I just got the Benjamin Button vibe.
Idris Alba?
No. I wish.
No.
I wish I was buff like Idris Elba.
All right. So we actually have some pretty big Broncos news.
We do?
Yeah. So I guess that's something to do with Russell Wilson. Not really sure what it is. No, he officially will be released after March 16th, right?
Yeah, and I think the definition is that it will not be or will be a post-June 1st designation. Because that's the important thing, right? Is that if it's a post-June designation, the Broncos will be on the hook for, right, like what is it, the $85 million versus the spreading it versus spreading it out, which I think everybody's basically confirmed, that the Broncos will spread the cap out, the $85 million in dead cap, they'll actually spread it out. The question is just how exactly will they go about it?
I would suspect the bigger number is going to be next year, just with the cap rising so significantly this year. If it even comes close to that kind of a percentage rise next season, we're going to be in much better shape kicking that can down one more year.
Yeah, I'm looking to see what the designation is going to be. Where's the announcement at? It is right there. Released after the league year begins March 13th. Does it say post-June? It doesn't say post-June 1st. It just says released after March 13th.
Huh. Well, the whole thing is that the Broncos are going to spread his cap out, though. I mean, it's not going to be the unfortunate one that maybe some fans have been clamoring for, which is just take it all. Take it all in year one. That's not going to happen. So I think that. I think that again, like we're just expecting.
Post June is what Schefter said.
Okay. So then that would fall in line with the idea that that's why they're going to be probably spreading it out. And yeah, so I'm curious to see how it all unfolds. I think it's really I found this out either today or yesterday. And this is how likely is it going to happen? That is I would say it's very minimal that it's not going to happen, but the good news for the Broncos and probably for Broncos country is the idea that let's just say that Russell Wilson signs that deal for like 1 year, 10 or $15 million, is that $10 to $15 million actually gets subtracted to the 34 million in cap space or whatever it is that they take on for like the 2024 year or the 2025 year, that you actually subtract that, like in terms of that deal. So the 10 and 30, and so the 10 actually becomes 24, and the 15 becomes 19. So like that's in a perfect world. That's like in a perfect world. But I think everybody and their mother is expecting that Russell Wilson is going to take that vet minimum.
Yeah. And I've seen two schools of thought there. One that he takes the vet minimum and it opens up his new team to having more money to sign some free agents around him. The other thought that I saw Andrew Brandt mention, and Ryan Leaf also said it on Dan Patrick today, was that these teams still want to do business with the Broncos in the future, and they may not stick it to them so hard as far as just getting a $1.2 million vet minimum on a quarterback and maybe giving him a little bit more money to soften the blow on the Broncos. I think personally, I think the vet minimum would make the most sense for my team. And, I would expect that most teams would understand business is business.
I mean, you said something, Mike, as far as the potential landing spot and possibly why the vet minimum would make sense.
So there's 5 teams that have been rumored to be like the favorites to land Wilson. Mm-hmm. The Falcons, the Raiders, the Steelers, the Vikings, and the Patriots. Now, the only ones that actually make sense, I think, that could have where he would fit right for me would be the Steelers and the Raiders. Mm-hmm. And I think out of those two, the Raiders are the better fit. And I hate saying that, but if the Raiders did go and get Russell Wilson, it would make sense for the Raiders to go with the minimum to stick the Broncos with the full cost. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just, I don't know. Like, it's one of those things like, you've got to have it in the back of your mind, the different scenarios and, and everything that could certainly unfold with Russell Wilson. But strictly talking about the whole Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos, Sean Payton experience, I think everybody, when you listen to it, either been Broncos reporters or maybe even fellow podcasters, it's just been a common consensus of it was just a philosophical difference on the field between Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, nothing more, nothing more. It had nothing to do, with who Russell Wilson was. It had nothing to do with, it had nothing to do with Sean Payton. It was just simply on the field. And if you truly look at it from that on-field perspective, they just never meshed right away. And this is something that we can, we will say numerous times. But Sean Payton just sadly did not handpick Russell Wilson. Sean handpicked the organization of the Denver Broncos and the ownership of the Denver Broncos. And so it's worth reinforcing that point. And so I think that, again, we just need to repreface that it was a strictly on the field performance-based decision between the Denver Broncos, or I should say Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, for the Broncos to move on from Russ.
And to be fair, and I want to throw this out there. Like, this isn't all on Russ, right? Like, on-field performance was not all on Russ. Like, it was a mix of both. Like, you could
agree.
And like Nick Ferguson and I have been going back and forth on this for like 2 weeks because we were just talking about the whole situation. And if you watch the games, right, like you can see the first 3 quarters of the game, Peyton and Russ are basically butting heads. Like, Russ is playing in Peyton's system and it's not working.
It's like fire and water.
Finally, in the 4th quarter, he lets him go, and that's when we start getting the comebacks. Now, I also think that if we had not hired Hackett in the first place, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and we wouldn't be letting Russ go.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
I mean, really, when you think about the start to Russ's career as a Bronco, and I certainly wish him well, is when Hackett did not go for it on 4th down. Russ had a killer game that night, 340 yards passing, was back in the stadium where he had thrived for 10 years plus, and they don't go for it. They opt for a ridiculously long, what would have been a record at that point field goal. That just really set the team on its ear, and it was really downhill from there. With the Russell Wilson experience. And quite honestly, like, Peyton can talk about the relationship and how great, they get along and such, but he didn't want Russ at all. He got a huge contract. He got a lot of power, and that came with the job. So he was able to stick it out for 1 year and then move on from Russ, and we'll see what happens. I certainly hope he's got a good plan. And because we need one. We're looking at a lot of different quarterbacks since Peyton Manning retired.
Yeah. And I do want to bring this up before we go into anything else, whether it be more Wilson talk or whatever. But we do want to thank Russell Wilson for everything he did in Denver. It may not have worked out, but we've said the same thing with every quarterback before Russell Wilson. We appreciate that you were here. We appreciate everything you did for the team. I hope you are successful, unless you go to the Raiders, and then screw you. You can't.
And again, like this is the thing that has always been said. I've always said it with Russell Wilson. He is a model human being. If they're like, if I was well older and I had a daughter and I wanted, someone to actually, have the opportunity to meet him one day and grow up to possibly like emulate and become a role model of, I mean, like you could never have scripted a better person to be a role model for someone. And that is exactly Russell Wilson. He is a model of being a genuine person of character. I mean, he's obviously a man of faith. We all know that, but like, and there's just certain things that have rubbed people the wrong way and the corniness and everything like that. But I'll tell you, for me, he is absolutely a wonderful human being. He's handled every single situation of adversity that is thrown his way with grace. And if that's not a lesson for all of us in the chat and in this stream, I don't know what is. Like when you're dealing with adversity and you're trying to deal with it like being a professional, like that should be a lesson for us. I mean, like with how he handled that whole situation.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 things from Bill. 1, what does Hackett have to do with it? Hackett sucks. Yeah, we know. If Russell Wilson had not had the horrible year he did under Hackett, I believe he would have gotten another year under Peyton to show the improvement and show what he could have done. Now, the reason why the $84 million cap hit doesn't really matter whether he's on the team or not, because we would still get hit with that whether he's on the team or not. So at this point, it's why have a quarterback on the team that doesn't work with the head coach that you're paying to sit on the bench? So you might as well cut him anyways. We're going to be on the hook for the money either way. Yeah. But this way, we're at least out of, I think we lose, or we don't have to pay him $24 million guaranteed now because we cut him.
It was actually more. I thought it was like the 39 million in guaranteed or something like that.
Okay.
Right. I mean, really the injury guarantee really was the fly in this entire ointment, because if there wasn't that second year on the hook, he probably would still remain with the team and they could have, made plans, because quite honestly, at 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and an 8-9 record, when it could have even been better, the guy, he could have been, it could have worked. But that contract, and Russ was given that contract. That was not, it was not a one-sided deal. And quite honestly, we all were excited about him being brought into the mix, and it just didn't work out. I think the Vikings are a real possibility there. And living in New England, I'm surprised, but quite a few Patriot fans, even at work, were mentioning that Russ would be a good fit with New England. And he really would, especially where they're about to draft a QB, or they're in the the third slot. So it just makes sense for them to have that. And if they bring Russ on for a couple of years, it makes perfect sense.
Sorry, Cam, hold on. One of the teams that was in that article for the best fits for Russ was New England, but one of the main reasons why they said it wasn't a good fit is because at this point in his career, you have to think Russ is going to prioritize winning. And at this point, you're 4 or 5 years away in New England from being a contender. So that could be a way for him to stay away from New England.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's going to have that many options. I don't think I don't think he's going to be able to nitpick and have something.
I mean, maybe. I mean, even so, he's not the Russ of old Seattle, right? But I mean, I think we all can agree he's still at least a mid-tier starter, maybe a little above
top 20. And
if you're going to get him at if you're going to get him at vet minimum, I mean, why wouldn't you take a flyer on him?
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Look at how this season worked out with how many starters went down and you needed a solid backup. I mean, to have any top-notch quarterback or experienced quarterback, especially at at a cost that would be less than Riley Dixon is making, would be just ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think that one of the reasons why, maybe the Patriots and even the Raiders make a lot of sense, and aside from the fact that it's in division, or aside from the fact that it's, just the fact that it is in division with Russell Wilson, you're talking about the Raiders and the Patriots in the conversation of players coach, right? And that kind of thinking, that kind of coaching style, I feel like would really benefit a guy like a Russell Wilson, right? Because at that point, you're talking about a situation where Russ is going in, and that a guy like a Gerard Mayo or possibly an Antonio Pierce, they're going to go into a situation where, all right, these are your tendencies. These are, the weaknesses. These are the things that, you don't do well. These are the things. So I feel like, because again, like, it's almost like, someone with a learning difference, when you go in and you go into a place where, they want to make sure that they work with you, right? They want to make sure that they work with you, work with your tendencies and help you grow and help you succeed. It's one of those situations where you're going into it in the sense of like, what's the best for you and what's the best thing for your growth. Personally, if I'm Russ, I also would hit maybe the reset button a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why a team like the Raiders or a team like the Patriots would make a ton of sense in that regard. You get a chance to play with the players coach with, once again, that relatability is such a big thing for a player. And especially for us, I feel like that's such a big thing.
Yeah. And I kind of want to go back just a little bit to kind of talk about how this whole situation happened. Like we knew that Russ and Peyton weren't a good fit about 5-6 games into the season. It wasn't going to work. But sooner than that. But the big thing was when the injury guarantee or the medical guarantee conversation happened, that this whole thing just went to hell in a handbasket. Now, to be fair, I think that the Broncos had every right to ask for him to waive it, and I think Russ had every right to say no. Like, I don't blame either side for that. My problem was when it became a PR battle. And the issue with that is that Denver the Broncos weren't engaging in the PR battle. They're doing exactly the same thing they've been doing since Sean Payton's been here, and that's keep their mouths shut and just let it go.
Yeah.
We started hearing everything coming out, and everything was shining a bad light on the Broncos, and it was coming from Russ's camp. That's the part that upset me. It wasn't the situation. It was the PR battle to try to make somebody look bad and somebody look good. That's where I got upset.
Yeah. And the thing that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way on the Russell side of things is this threat notion, right? There's this whole threat notion that the Broncos threatened to bench him, right? Like because of the injury guarantees. And it's worth repeating. And you talked about it briefly there, Mike. I mean, it's like they wanted to defer his injury guarantees to another, point down the road. I want to say it was 2025 is when they wanted to push the guarantees.
Yeah, so that they would guarantee him on the contract or on the team this year.
Yeah. Exactly. And so like if you're looking at it from that perspective, it's like actually the Broncos want you here necessarily. Sean Payton and the team, they want you here, so like so I just think that like from that standpoint, it's like, why wouldn't you want to accept that if you want the team to be looking at it from that, that certain standpoint? So this whole threat thing is really just where it kind of rubs me the wrong way, because if it was in fact a threat, right? If it was in fact a threat, which from everything that we've been told and we've been reading up, right, is that the Broncos did no wrong, right? The Broncos did no wrong in this in this situation. So if there was in fact a threat, you're talking about an NFLPA issue. And more importantly, you're talking about there. See, it agrees with me. It agrees with me.
Bubble thumbs up. Yes.
The bubble thumbs up.
I want to know what those
mysterious.
are.
I honestly don't know, but you would get.
Wait, so Cam, you don't think that they told him that they were going to bench him if he didn't defer his? I 100% think that that's exactly what happened.
No, what I'm saying is like I think they had a conversation about the benching. I'm just saying like this the whole threat notion. Like that they threatened to bench him, because if you threatened him, you're talking about an NFLPA issue, and more importantly, you're talking about a labor issue for them threatening Russ to be a benching. So it's just a Pandora's box at that point. If the threat was true.
I think they 100% threatened him. I think they then realized that they couldn't get away with some of the approach that they were making, and the NFLPA did send a letter there. We did see that, and listen, why on earth, if you're a player, would you ever waive that? It's massive money, but one clip of the Brandon Marshall podcast that did not get circulated was Russ was saying, why would I? He goes, I don't want to set a precedent for other players in the NFL where I'm waiving this, and then other teams can go to their players and use that against the players in order to strong on them to make a change. And I mean, I think that's the smartest thing out there outside of protecting your own, $39 million. It was like you said, it was fine for the Broncos to ask. It was fine for Russ to say no, but I 100% think that they tried to tell him, well, we're not going to play you. And we saw that in the last 2 games of the season, because that wasn't a performance issue. The guy was having a solid season up to that point, and the Broncos had a chance to get over 500, and the Broncos benched him for a second string quarterback.
And I thought that was smart for Russ. I was going to say, I thought that was smart for Russ if you're looking at it like that, because that is a precedent where that rarely does happen in terms of possibly doing something like that. Because, once you're doing something like that, you are setting a precedent for some other players. So it's just at the end of the day, it just kind of tie a bow on all of it, right? It's just it goes back to just the mesh between Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. Just unfortunately, it just philosophically, it just did not work. But, the one area where I feel like you do have to give kudos again is both to Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, especially at the beginning point of the year, and the fact of we're going to try and make it work. I'll try and build this offense around, what it is that you do well. Right. And we'll see if we can be able to make this work. So there was some give and take from both sides in the very beginning. Just unfortunately, it crashed and burned at week 6, if you will, based on the conversations. And then at that point, that was the nail in the coffin.
And this is my thing, right? Doesn't it make sense for the team to have the conversation with Russell Wilson of, hey, we want you to move this to next year, and if you don't, then we're going to have to sit you, especially when the team is 1-5 and it doesn't look like you're going to make the playoffs. I mean, doesn't it make sense to have that conversation then?
And didn't they beat the Chiefs?
Yeah, but they had the conversation before that, and then they had another one after. Because there were 2 conversations.
I do remember the Buffalo game, that there was a conversation right before the Buffalo game.
So, I mean, at that point, you're sitting at what? 1-5, 2-6, 2-5. Wouldn't that be the time that you had that conversation of hey, we want to make sure that you're here next year. Can you move this? And if you don't, we're going to sit you because we don't want to pay you to not play. You know what I mean?
How did that get put in the contract to begin with? I mean, what a team unfriendly clause to put in there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's one of the other conversations I want to have is a lot of people ripping into George Payton because of everything that's gone on in Denver. And I think as far as Russell Wilson and the contract extension goes, you can't really hold that against him. At the time, the Russell Wilson trade made sense. At the time, the Russell Wilson restructure or re-signing or new contract made financial sense for the team. It only doesn't work now because of possibly the worst decision he ever made and hired Nathaniel Hackett. I think you hold that against him. But as far as the Russell Wilson situation, I don't think that's on George Payton. The trade makes sense, and the restructure or the re-signed contract was an owner thing. Whether Payton wanted it or not, it was going to happen.
Here's the sad reality of it, though. I agree with you. It's really smart to look at it in hindsight, because if you were put in those types of shoes, in the case of there's no ownership yet, like we should preface that there is no ownership yet, for the Broncos. And so I do think that there's at least an angle of this in the sense of like George Paton trying to make it manageable and, appeal for an ownership group to come in and buy the team, and at least make it, appealing. That said, though, when you make a trade like that, and hiring, maybe one of the worst coaches of all time is also going to be in that category. But when you make a trade like that and then it fails, like it's the unfortunate nature of the business that if that fails, that's a bad look and that's a bad mark on your record, right? And so now when you look at it from that standpoint, you now have a bad trade that's on your record, and you've hired a very, very bad head coach at that point in time. But even then, looking at it, like even from the contract part of things, I think from my vantage point, it's like, and actually, I think we had this conversation. Like, it's just like when we're on MHRT, like before, it's like we had the conversation that like it was actually smart to possibly do the extension, right? It was smart to actually do the extension at that point in time. But that said, again, hindsight's 2020. You look at it now, you see his performance and everything. Like, I mean, like it was pretty obvious as Gage mentions in the chat there. Like it was pretty obvious that the Broncos plan A was Aaron Rodgers, and that there's no way to sugar, especially when you think of how the Jets have circulated this in hiring Nathaniel Hackett and following through and actually getting Aaron Rodgers.
Yep.
Like it's pretty simple to connect the dots in this idea that the Broncos actually wanted Aaron Rodgers. So that rumor that we thought was a very strong rumor of them wanting Aaron Rodgers was, I would fair to assume, very true.
And and I've mentioned it before, but Russ had the no trade clause. There was no chance he was going to waive that to a team that wasn't going to sign him to an extension. And what's the craziest part of this is he will never take one snap of that extended contract, and we're going to be paying a salary hit or salary cap hit of $85 million. It's just crazy. But Gage is 1,000,000% right. That Hackett was the lure for Aaron Rodgers, and that fish did not bite. And by the time the following year, Packers were so fed up with him. The Jordan Love looked like he was going to possibly be able to take the reins, which he did, and they were ready to get rid of him and send him to the Jets. And
obviously kudos to Love. That's a complete side story to this, but kudos to Love for actually playing well and making it so that getting rid of Aaron Rodgers was actually the smart decision.
So what do you think happens with Peyton after George Peyton I'm talking about after the draft? I think he ends up staying, but what do you guys think?
Well, that's what Bill was asking is, do we think George Payton needs to be fakeed for his mishandling of the last several hirings contract? Fired.
Fakeed the guy. Fakeed.
No, honestly, I think George Payton has a good fit currently in the Broncos front office, right?
Yeah.
Like his strength is, despite what Zach Seeger says, I don't care. Like George Payton is really, really good at evaluating talent, making workups on draft picks, on free agents. That's what he does. That's what he's good at. That's what he grew up in the business doing. And it's one of the reasons why the Vikings were that good of a team for so long, was because he was helping with bringing in people for the roster. And despite the rookie grade that we got this last year, like you can't really grade rookies on their first year, right? Because there's only going to be a handful that are like out of this world kind of years, right? Like CJ Stroud doesn't happen every year. That is not an every year thing, right? So I think you have to look at the last 3 to 4 seasons of a draft pick. And I think from that standpoint, when you look at who George Payton has brought in the draft, I think you're looking at some pretty good prospects.
Yeah. And I've mentioned this point a few times as it correlates to George Payton and Sean Payton. let's kind of go back and, jump in a DeLorean and go back in time a little bit. When Sean Payton was with the New Orleans Saints, Mickey Loomis was the general manager there.
Yep.
And when Sean Payton was there, he had no relationship whatsoever with Mickey Loomis. And then when you go back and you watch his Broncos press conference, what does he say? He says, one of my great friends, Mickey Loomis. So they've been able to make it work. And I think that has a possibility of happening here in Denver with a guy like George Payton, especially when you think about, him possibly being a very good draft scout and him scouting players and evaluating, talent and, and I mean, I think it's fair to assume on some of the classes, maybe like 2021, not named, Pat Surtain, but I think that like it's still fair to assume, that he's an overall good evaluator, right? And I think that once they're on the same page, I think that's when you'll start to see both of them mesh really well, because and it goes back to a different angle of tendencies. Once you understand a person's tendencies, even after a year or even after 2 years, then you start to see things mesh and grow. And that's when you start to see the team grow and, the performance, the possibility of performance on the field start to, profit a little bit more because of, what you're possibly seeing. I also think in terms of with Gage and with how he's saying, that he's not going to be anywhere. But think of it maybe just within the last, 72 hours in terms of, in terms of George Payton. If they really wanted to move on from George Payton, malpractice would have been, you move on from him like right before the draft or even like right after the draft. The fact that combine just happened and they've went through the combine, they've evaluated the process, they've evaluated everything that they've seen necessarily.
Making roster moves during the whole thing, yeah.
Exactly, making roster moves and everything. Like, even then, it just feels like the wrong thing to do to let go of a guy. Like, I remember when the Pittsburgh Steelers did this, or something along the lines of that, is that they didn't have a general manager in place or something. And they went forward in the NFL draft without a general manager, without necessarily a general manager, and then they hired the general manager after the draft. So, like, in essence, like, I don't want to say setting up the general manager to fail, but it's just like the general manager is necessarily inheriting a team that they drafted that year and players he did not draft that year. So it's just like you're setting up a general manager to fail necessarily. So I think that like it's just really smart to see it develop, to see it grow, and so I think George Payton is here.
It's like Chopped. You open up the basket of ingredients, you're like, oh shit, that's what I'm left with.
Well, and to be fair, I think that Sean Payton helps George Payton with everything that's going on, right? Like you have Sean Payton coming in saying, this is what I'm assuming. I don't know. I'm not in the building. But you have Sean Payton coming in saying, hey, I like this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. They fit. Go figure out how we can get them. And then George Payton goes and does the business side of things. Like, that's how you want the partnership to work. And I think that's why the Payton combination is going to work in Denver. The opposite of Jerry Jones and Mike McCarthy.
If you think about George Payton's, past life with Minnesota, he was second in command to Rick Spielman for a very, very long time. So he is not, I don't say not used to being the boss, but he's comfortable in a collaborative position and not being the number one all the time. Or so it would seem, based on the fact that he had other opportunities previously to interview for regular GM jobs and either passed on the interviews or passed on the jobs themselves.
Yeah.
So I think the collaboration is good. I also think George Payton realizes that if he wants to keep his job, he really needs to collaborate with Sean and defer to him probably in many different ways.
But, real quick, I'm really glad you brought that up, because in terms of like the George Payton, because that's, I think, a nice little side thing with George Payton that I think maybe gets thrown on the rug, especially given George Payton. And that is, before he joined Denver, do you know how many people mentioned that they were really happy to see George Paton land the general manager job with the Denver Broncos. There were a lot of people, like the Broncos got rave reviews in them hiring George Paton. Like it was pretty positive with them landing Paton. So this idea that I think that, the Broncos move on from George, I don't think that, he's going to have a short list of jobs, for him to go, and find work. Like he is well respected around the National Football League. I think, teams value his opinion clearly. I mean, one of his closest friends, and you said Rick Spielman, is really, really close with George.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, Minnesota, when Peyton was there, even called him almost like second in command. Like, so I mean, it was almost like he was a general manager in waiting. So it was just a matter of when and seizing that right opportunity for him and his family. And like, so I think that still, I think there's a part of this where they make it work. They understand, how it can grow. And again, this is just the first year with Sean Payton and George Payton. Like, let's say that again. It was the first year with George Payton and Sean Payton.
So we talked about Russell Wilson. We talked about how he's not with the team anymore. Thanked him. Talked about the issues. Talked about the solutions. Now I want to kind of get into how we replace Russell Wilson and where we go from here. Like, I know we've talked about draft. We'll talk a little bit about the draft. I want to talk more combine than draft.
Is that the draft still though?
Yeah, kind of. I just like, I don't want to talk about like,
Olympics.
if we're going to move up a spot or move down. Yeah, Chris Jones in his underpants. Ding, ding, flying all over. That was the greatest thing ever. Dude, call me off topic.
He had three goals just on that 40-yard dash.
Did you hear his interview about that, Chris Jones?
No.
He's like, yeah, everybody was in like these spandex pants. So I was like, well, I got some on. So I pulled my pants down with my spandex shorts. And then I didn't realize until after I ran to 40 that was underwear, not spandex pants. I was like, dude, such a good interview. It's funny. I think it was on the Kelsey Brothers podcast. So good. It was hilarious.
Yeah. Which by the way, speaking of Kelsey, greatest. That was one of the greatest retirement press conferences I can recall. Like honestly, it gave me goosebumps. Even
before he even said a word.
Yeah. So speaking of podcasts, I can't wait for that episode.
Tomorrow,
congrats to Jason Kelsey on a fantastic career. Yeah. I would say arguably one of the best centers ever.
Oh my gosh.
An absolute amazing
first
center.
Ballot Hall of Famer. It was I saw a funny little story about how, he started crying like 2 seconds into this thing. And so one of the Eagles PR people had a box of Kleenex and they also had the small towel. And the person that was going to hand it to him grabbed the towel instead and just handed it to him. It's like tissues were not going to do the job here. He needed full-fledged towel for that press conference.
Yeah. So we'll get into the combine a little bit, and I want to leave the majority of free agents to mainly on Wednesday because I know Cam is going over that with Luke and crap,
Lance and Carl.
Sorry, we even talked about it before we get Lance and Carl. Sorry,
Luke and Lance. It sounds the same.
It starts with an L.
Yeah.
Lance and Carl. Sorry, on Wednesday on Manly. So make sure you check that out.
So real quick, I don't know why it reminded me of this, but do you guys remember the scene at Caddyshack? Like it reminded me of that scene at Caddyshack where Bill Murray has Chevy Chase in his garage, right? Because he had a really, and he goes, and Bill Murray goes, "Can I ask you a question, Frank?" Tie. That's exactly what it made me think of.
Yeah. So Lance and Carl on Mainly tomorrow with Cam. They're going to be talking about free agents. So I want to leave the majority of that there. But I think that there is potentially a quarterback out there in free agency that we kind of talked about this a little bit before the show that is asking for a fully guaranteed contract. And I think that with the owners that we have, this guy is potentially in range for the Broncos. And I'm talking about Kirk Cousins. I think, and Cam, we talked a little bit about it before. Glenn came on 2 seconds before the show started. He would have known that if he was here. But Kirk Cousins and Sean Payton would be a good fit offensively. And again, with the owner's bankroll that we have, I think a fully guaranteed contract keeps the cap hit down and allows us to go after a Kirk Cousins.
I mean,
but what kind of money? I know he's floated out 2 years, 90 mil, but coming off of an injury like he is, where realistically do you think he ends up as far as a contract?
As far as a contract, it's hard to say because it's such a. I mean, obviously, it's going to be in the 40s range because he well deserves that. I mean, based on his performance, he's arguably a top 12, top 10 quarterback in the league. So and we all know that in the market value of someone like that, like you're probably going to be making, let's just preface it this way. If Daniel Jones is making 40 a year, what is Kirk Cousins going to end up making? So it's just like, I think it's probably still maybe at that 45 a year, range. I feel like that's pretty adequate. I will say this, and I actually said this to Mike, before we before we even were recording this. Take the pipe dream out of it. Take the long shot out of it. The best possible fit for the Denver Broncos, or specifically Sean Payton, is Kirk Cousins. Like, he fits 100% what the Denver Broncos, specifically under Sean Payton, want to do. And like I said, in terms of how this is going to sound bad, that Achilles injury may be the best chance the Denver Broncos have at possibly signing Kirk Cousins because of that Achilles injury. Mm-hmm. Now, and the question just becomes, what do you do behind Kirk Cousins? Because the moment you don't have anything behind Kirk Cousins is when, while you're talking about the exact same scenario that we've been having for the last 8 years under Peyton Manning. Because, I know people have said, well, we don't want any more bridge quarterbacks. You can't have a bridge if you don't have a bridge to go to, a guy behind you. The Broncos didn't have anybody necessarily behind them to go to with guys like Case Keenum and Joe Flacco. They weren't a bridge. They were just like, that's why they call them Band-Aids, right? I mean, so like Kirk Cousins at that point would be a Band-Aid.
Yeah, the bridge to nowhere isn't just in Alaska. It's in Denver also.
Yeah. You can't see Russia from their house, though, when you're in Alaska.
And I definitely think I tried to fight through that one. I couldn't. I think if you go with Kirk Cousins, you definitely have to draft one as well, right? Like, signing Kirk Cousins does not affect your first round pick, your third round pick. It doesn't affect that at all. And I do think that going with Kirk Cousins would be the best option for a rookie learning behind, right, for a year or two. Like, if you wanted to go get a J.J. McCarthy, which after watching the combine, seeing the performance, I think he might be out of range for the Broncos unless they trade up.
Who knows?
But like, let's say you take a J.J. McCarthy or a Bo Nix, or you wait until the third, trade up in the second, and go get Rattler or somebody like that. Having a guy like Kirk Cousins to sit behind for 2 years and learn from is the perfect scenario. And I know that Gage said feels like a pipe dream, but honestly, if you think about it and you think about how the contract will be structured and how much money you would need guaranteed up front, I don't think it's that big of a pipe dream. With as much money as we can throw around to avoid a big cap hit from Cousins, I don't think it's a pipe dream at all.
Well, the cap hit would just be spread out over so many years down the road that all of a sudden it could be affecting the second contract of your brand new quarterback. We quite honestly, if we sign Cousins, we're looking at probably about $80 million just in between Russ and Cousins contracts, on a cap, from a cap standpoint, which is pretty sizable considering some of the other things that we need to sign.
Yeah. But
positions we need to fill, I should say.
But it goes, and now when you kind of bring the logic, into it, just to, into it, like, I think that what Sean Payton probably wants, because if one of the things that has been said numerous times is is the long game with Sean Payton, right? It is the long game with Sean Payton. So bringing Kirk Cousins in is necessarily the same move that George Payton would have made for a guy like Russell Wilson, right? Like an established guy, like an established quarterback, right? So it's almost necessarily the same move. And maybe he views it. He views Kirk Cousins in the same way he viewed Drew Brees. The difference there is Drew Brees was way younger versus Kirk Cousins is 35 years old. And at the back nine or probably whole 15 of his career, like so, so
if you sign Cousins and then draft Bo Nix, you have two quarterbacks the same age.
Wow!
By the end of their second deal, right? for Nix, yeah. But no, I think that when you bring the logic into it, the point is, I think that Sean probably wants, and this is why I think the rookie quarterback is the most logical option, is because I feel like he really wants a quarterback that he can just mold and form into the quarterback that he wants. And I've said this a few times, either on here or on mainly, but I feel like there are a few quarterbacks that do fit the bill of that, like in this class. Bo Nix, obviously, JJ McCarthy are probably like your two most logical fits, within the system of probably what Sean Payton wants to run. And then I already, and then that's when you maybe look at Michael Penix Jr., right? Michael Penix Jr. possibly as a fit. The only problem there is what can he do outside of the pocket, right? I mean, because like inside the pocket, you're talking about a pure pocket passer, so I think that from there you could probably work with him, and then even beyond that, are you able to mold, shape, and form a guy like, and obviously we have a Oklahoma Sooner fan in the chat with Ty Walden in here. Do you want to take a guy like a Spencer Rattler, mold him, shape him into truly the quarterback everybody necessarily envisioned him as a freshman in Oklahoma, a high flight recruit, really talented, a guy that, the reason why Spencer Rattler was an afterthought at Oklahoma was the reason why the number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft, Caleb Williams, came to Oklahoma. Like the moment Caleb Williams stepped foot on that field in the Red River Shootout was the moment Spencer Rattler's career, his time in Oklahoma was, shot, if you will. So I think that Rattler, he's got some tools, man. He's got some tools that you could probably shape and mold into a really solid quarterback.
And now Rattler has kind of taken the place of Michael Pratt. Pratt had really caught fire for a little bit, and then he's come back to earth. But you mentioned Penix, and his medicals came up very, very good at the combine. And his passing, I don't know if I've ever seen a quarterback throw a prettier pass than Michael Penix Jr. His accuracy is there, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Knowing that the medicals are in line with selecting someone to be a future quarterback in the NFL, what do you guys think as far as the Broncos maybe trading back a few picks and then picking up Penix and perhaps the second round pick or an extra third round?
I know that his medical's cleared, but the injury history still scares me to death.
It's been 2 years though.
I know, but still, like it wasn't just one; it was like 3.
Yeah.
But the guy is so good. The accuracy is sick.
I feel like in a perfect draft world of like that would be ideal, and maybe because of how deep it is at quarterback, this is the rare case where you could see a team trade back into the 20s. And you draft a Bo Nix in the 20s, right? Like you could possibly, do that.
Wow.
I think that, and I think it's a fairest on it. It's a hot take. Well, I actually shouldn't say a take, but I could see this happening, a scenario happen where Penix, because of the medicals, regardless if they came through clear, we also have to think of age, right? We also have to think of age. With Penix, and so he's the same age, if you will, of Bo, and so like I think that like there's a possibility that a guy like a Spencer Rattler could be drafted over Michael Penix just for that reason. And in terms of especially what you want to work with and the potential of a guy like a Rattler. But I just think that with Penix, it just depends on what you feel you could do with Penix. Because I will be honest with you, Glenn, I'm kind of with you in the sense of like, I really think if there's a pure passer, like strictly a pure passer in this class, there may not be a guy who is the best pure passer, in this, right? So, but again, like, and maybe this is like a weird way to look at it. I don't know how Sean necessarily evaluates this, but if you're looking at it from the simple point of the final product with a quarterback, and necessarily he's looking at it from the college game, we know that Sean Payton loves the trenches, right? We know that Sean Payton loves the trenches. He loves offensive line play. Well, guess who just so happens to be 3 of those 4 teams in the national championship with quarterback options this year in the NFL draft, who had maybe the 3 best offensive line in football.
Blue Mountain State,
Washington, Oregon, and Michigan. All 3 had elite offensive line. And so I feel like if you're looking at the final product of how you can mold a guy like a Michael Penix, a J.J. McCarthy, or even a Bo Nix, and use them for your possible offense, I think that like that's a really good way for you to evaluate it, because then you're looking at the final product of what you can work with or maybe just a little bit more. And I think that maybe that's why for me, a guy like a Bo Nix or a J.J. McCarthy probably falls a little bit more in line once you kind of start realizing maybe what Sean Payton ideally would like to run versus, maybe like a Michael Penix.
You see Gage saying that, and Buana asked about Hendon Hooker. He was from he was in the 3rd round, but seeing Gage suggests that Penix is going in the 3rd round. At first I was like, oh my gosh. But then when you think about some of these dominoes falling, and we're going to know a lot more than we do once free agency starts, and we know where Cousins goes, and we know where Justin Fields gets traded, and some of the other, if Baker re-signs with the Bucs, you're going to all of a sudden realize like who still needs a quarterback, and these spots are going to get filled. So, it's potentially, there may not be teams that need a top-notch quarterback or a high-ranking quarterback that Gage may be right. He could slip to some, to several rounds in, which would be absolutely shocking for a player of his caliber. And, with the success that he had this year, but there may be too many chairs in that game of musical chairs that get filled before he starts sliding a little bit.
And not to mention too, like if you were an executive, would you rather roll with a guy who is, he's been clear for 2 years for medical concerns, but he's had 2 ACL injuries? Would you rather roll with a guy who's, entering the same age with a guy like a Bo Nix, or would you rather even roll with a guy like a Spencer Rattler, who's very, very talented for being a 2nd round, 3rd round pick, right?
Bonus in contract.
Right. And so like, what would you almost like, it feels really tempting for you to be like, you know what, I think I'll roll with, a person who's got truly like the full, bill of health versus a guy who he definitely has been, clear. But to that same side point of that though, that also can very easily bite you in the butt. Because because once you do have Michael Penix in the system and he goes to a very good team and a team that he can work with, then we're having the conversation of, well, why didn't we draft Michael Penix Jr., right? Which is exactly kind of like where we're falling in line right now with a guy like Brock Purdy.
Yeah, so, I feel like Penix could go to a Raiders and thrive there. That's what kind of scares me a little bit. So I don't know. So Biggie Buana mentions Joe Milton, the Volunteers quarterback. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, Biggie brings up a lot of quarterback names. We also have Buana bringing up Milton. when you look at the combine and look at performances of whether it be quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, offensive linemen, whoever ran the 4.21 40, which was impressive, and he didn't hurt himself afterwards. So
he was definitely worthy of it for sure.
Oh yeah. But I think when you look at combine performances, I think JJ McCarthy went up. I think at this point it would not shock me if he was top 7 in the draft. And as much as I love JJ McCarthy, I don't know if Denver has the ammo to move up, which sucks. I think Bo Nix stayed about the same. I think Michael Penix in league circles probably stayed about the same. Spencer Rattler didn't really go anywhere. Joe Milton was talk of the town for a little bit there.
Well, he had that 73-yard pass, and that's the longest in combine history from what I understand. So Buana, that's why, and it was just effortless. I mean, the guy is just
wasn't he number 1 in the hardest throw too? He threw like 62, 63 miles an hour.
Oh, I'm sure
62. But
and then McCarthy was what, 61?
Yeah, he was 61. Let's not react too much to that because we're oh man, he threw
I'm not going into that. No. But I think the big question.
If we need a guy throwing a ball against a wall, he's our guy.
Bang! I think with a guy like Joe Milton, I mean, you're still talking like 5th, 6th, maybe 4th.
Not for me.
Maybe undrafted. I don't know, but I think at that point, once you get past those top like 6, 7 quarterbacks,
8,
I think you're talking like backups at that point.
Right. Oh, no doubt.
Well, the only one that I feel like has a legitimate conversation in that no, shut up.
Disney Prince.
Right.
Broncos social media royalty. Just put that face on everything.
I need some Sam Hartman in my life. Quite honestly,
like the brush endorsements, the comb endorsements, hairspray, mousse. That guy's everywhere.
Yeah.
No,
except on the football field because he's not getting drafted.
That's fine.
Yeah. The one guy though, and I think I mentioned his name before, not a lot though, but who would fall in that category would be Jordan Travis. Just because if he did not have his leg injury at Florida State, you are talking about a guy who is in that conversation of that top 7, top 8.
Sam Hartman, future franchise QB for the Arlington Renegades. But outside of quarterback, was there any player that stood out to you at the combine?
Yeah, there were a few. There were definitely a few. I think it would at least be beneficial, since we are a Broncos-related podcast, to lead off with a very familiar name, and that would be Luke McCaffrey. I feel like Luke McCaffrey had a pretty solid combine, and for a guy that here's a wide receiver. And anybody who doesn't know, he committed to Nebraska as a quarterback. It never worked out with him at quarterback. He transferred to Louisville, and then in a span of a month, without taking a snap, he transfers over to Rice. He finds out that he's not built to possibly be a quarterback, but they decide to utilize him at wide receiver. So he's fresh, he's raw, but he had almost like he only had like 900 yards receiving in back-to-back seasons at Rice or something like that. He put up some impressive numbers with Rice. So he's a guy you could work with. He's actually a physical wide receiver for being only like 6 feet and 6'1". He can catch it at its highest point. Frankly, it sounds crazy, but he's savvy enough. I feel like he would work really well with the Sean Payton system. He's an emergency quarterback. So I think he helped his cause. I think he helped him possibly go into the draft maybe a little bit more. And there's some others for me that I'll mention here in just a little bit, but leading off with obviously Luke McCaffrey, I thought he helped himself.
And he also outran his brother.
McCaffrey back on the Broncos, right?
Yeah.
Could you imagine how much that would hold in the entire McCaffrey family, knowing the fact that the guy that everybody wanted, right? That the guy that everybody wanted in Broncos country was Christian McCaffrey. So the fact
and I did see that side by side they did with Christian and Luke, Glenn, the race, the run off or race off.
I love that.
Yeah,
it is cool. And is number 87 open?
It might be
Brandon Johnson, isn't it?
No, he's 89.
Unless the Broncos decide to have a reunion with no fans, then I don't know if 87 may not be available. But yeah, that would be something. And
that is interesting because he is a free agent, by the way.
It is, yeah, it is. Yeah. But
who else is Drew Lock? No,
but
don't hold me to it.
But the thing is, like you said it on record. I'm just saying, you said it. See, we get a thumbs up. You said it on record.
I'm erasing this podcast immediately.
The bubble thumbs up is incredible.
I will say. I will say though, I thought that this is a bit notable, and kudos to Susie Wargen, who actually has the clip of this. But if you guys go back and you find Susie Wargen on Twitter during the combine and during that whole thing, Lisa McCaffrey mentioned this, that if I'm not mistaken, and Glenn help me on this one, but like she said that Luke McCaffrey may end up being the most talented.
87.
Oh, so 87 is available.
Yeah.
But that Luke McCaffrey may end up being or is the most talented McCaffrey in the entire family.
That's
okay. I didn't know how to respond to that.
His mom said that.
She said
actually she's probably the best athlete in the entire family, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Who was the bro that coached at UNC?
Max, I think.
Max, yeah. It was Dylan or Max.
Yeah.
I know
Dylan
Dylan
was a quarterback.
Yeah, one was the quarterback, the other one was the OC.
Yeah.
Will this stupid Drew Lock ship ever sail? He's become the ex the fans get in the That's a thumbs up comment right there, Cam.
That's right. Sponsored by the Thumbs Up organization.
There you go. But yeah, I do think Luke McCaffrey would be a great fit. Were there any offensive linemen that stood out to you?
Well, I got to, because I mentioned it in our group chats and stuff.
Yes.
University of New Hampshire. I got to give him a shout out. Was invited as a running back, did a 4.54 40. The vertical 37 inches. He was number one with the 20-yard shuttle. Guy bench pressed 23 times. He's 5'10", 206, but he is an all-purpose running back. Even was asked he was one of 3 running backs at the combine to stick around and do some more wide receiver drills because the guy can catch it like nobody's business. Had 295 yards receiving in the first game of the season this year of his senior year. I think he would be an absolute weapon in a Sean Payton offense. I know I'm a homer as a UNH guy, but I would love to see Dylan Laube go to the Denver Broncos in 4th or 5th round.
I mean, you're kind of preaching to the choir here for me, Glenn, because like just evaluating him and looking at him, one, I was shocked to see how, and maybe you know this, but I was shocked to see how like fit he was. Yeah, like he is jacked.
Checking him out,
Dylan Laube from New Hampshire. Yeah,
what I said.
But like, so I mean, like he fits the mold. Like he kind of fits the mold too of like what Sean Payton's looking for, like an all-purpose running back. And he's a guy that would really work well either out of the backfield on kickoff returns, on punt returns. Like he's an all-purpose threat, and I think that like he's not just the only one that's like in this class. I think you got Isaac Goriendo, and shout out to Carter Dillon of Let's Talk Broncos for getting me on board a little bit with him. Last week he really showed out at the combine. Jalen Wright was another one in terms of another, do it all running back, if you will, out of the backfield, either between the tackles, outside the tackles. Jalen Wright is another one. And if we're even going to go forward to maybe to another position, another guy that I thought was really impressive was Theo Johnson. Theo Johnson, the tight end from Penn State. I think that Theo Johnson, and I believe it was Daniel Jeremiah, ironically had this comparison, but he said Theo compared very favorably to Jimmy Graham. And we know that Jimmy Graham is, or played in New Orleans, and obviously has history with Sean Payton. So maybe there's there's something there with Theo. But he put up some impressive numbers. The guy is like 6'7", like 260 some pounds, and he ran a 4.58 on his second 40. Like it's impressive numbers for a guy that's that big. But as far as it's just real quick, as far as some offensive linemen for me, Javon Foster, I thought, did really well. He's the tackle. I want to say it's from Missouri. Did pretty well. Taylor Bartolini is the guy from Wisconsin. You're talking about like a pure offensive lineman that you can put, anywhere on that offensive line. So like anywhere. And if there's one thing, and at least in the past, that the Broncos have at least prided themselves on, it's been the versatility, right? Those versatile weapons. And I'm sure it's probably the case for anybody, like a guy like a Zach Strief. So again, like there were some definite winners for sure within the class.
And Beast brings up Holker from CSU. He had one of the more memorable moments of the combine. He thought that the passing drill was done, and when they threw it, and so he had the ball in his hand, and when they threw him a second pass, he caught it with the one-handed with the other hand, and went running. It was a pretty comical moment, but it got people interested in talking about him for sure.
How would you evaluate that? If you're like an executive, like I feel like that would be like almost like chucking a three in the NBA, and when you're not supposed to, and the coach is saying no, yes, like yeah, because I feel like it's one of those cases, like especially in the gauntlet drill, you're supposed to finish it, but like the fact that he caught it with two arms, and like two hands and everything, it's just like that's impressive. So like if you're looking at it from like the athletic side of things, I feel like it actually did more to help
it did.
Than it did hurt him.
Buwana wants to know about J.C. Latham.
Top tackle. In fact, I would venture to guess that he is going to be one of the maybe 10 offensive linemen that could go in the first round.
Could he go to the Chargers if they don't take like a Bowers or move back?
They might. I feel like if I was, see, the thing is, like, I'm trying to, like, I don't want to do this because now that he's with the Chargers, it makes me puke. But if I were to put a Charger hat on and kind of think about like what Jim Harbaugh would do, every time that he's been with either Stanford or Michigan, one of the biggest things that he has always prided himself on has been protection, offensive line, right? Offensive line is really big for him. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why that's one of the reasons why, like,
there you go, Bill.
That's one of the reasons why, like, Brock Bowers is in that conversation, because he's such a, he's a positionless player, but he can block his butt off. Like, he can block his butt off. So that's a nightmare scenario. But honestly, a guy like a Joe Alt is in that conversation. What is it? Maybe a J.C. Latham is in that conversation. Talise Falaga from Oregon State is in that conversation as well. So I mean, like, there are just a few guys. Obviously, Olu Foshanu from Penn State. There's a few other guys that's in that top 10 that could go in the top 10 that I think that the Chargers should go. And especially when you think about it from the Chargers' perspective and protecting Herbert, that's actually a scary situation for the Broncos, because now you're talking about a Rashawn Slater at your left tackle position and Latham or whoever they draft at tackle to be your right tackle. Like, you almost have your bookends for the next, decade now to protect Justin Herbert. So it's just, I feel like the Chargers at pick 5 even without hiring Harbaugh, we're in a win-win situation.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question, and this is going to be the last question before we kind of close it out. There was a lot to talk about, so we've gone long, but I don't care because I'm having fun. There was a big thing about Caleb Williams only doing medicals for teams that were interviewing him. Didn't go through any of the drills. Same thing with Jaden Daniels. Same thing with Drake May. What is your guys' opinion on people not participating in the drills in the combine?
If you're talking strictly drills, I don't hate that at all. I mean, like, especially in the conversation of, if you feel like everything that you've heard, which is thousands and thousands of, reports coming back from teams or agents, or, in conversations like that. And from everything that you've heard, like, and you've been hearing that you are a guaranteed top 5 pick, I wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. It's fun. The 40 times are fun. It's a fun TV grab. It's a fun, thing necessarily to watch how fast these guys are for quarterbacks and, and possibly, maybe
you have to say it.
What, like say thumbs up?
Thumbs up.
But no, I
do a double thumbs up and see if two things.
Do a double and say thumbs up.
Double thumbs up.
Yes! Oh, what was that?
What is that?
Wait, what was that?
That's incredible. We just had Disney fireworks behind Cam.
Thank you, Sam
I'm
Hartman.
worried that he's going to be like, yeah, and then a porno is going to go off behind him.
You're worried about that?
Shut the whole but shut the whole channel.
No, it doesn't worry. It doesn't worry me one bit, though.
That was fun.
Yeah, you know what though? On the flip side, though, what quarterback are they talking about the most at the combine? They're talking about JJ McCarthy, and one of the things that he did is he threw. We all know, bless you, we all know that they're going to have their pro days and such, and be able to do all those different things in a more controlled environment. And that's what I like when a guy is willing to put himself out there. I mean, he just won a national championship, so we all know he's going to go pretty high. But I like that he passed. I don't blame these guys for not running the 40.
Yeah.
That there are certain drills that don't make sense, but certainly passing is not a bad idea.
Well, I think, like, when you look at Jaden Daniels, right? Like, Jaden Daniels is one of the guys that's being talked about going higher than what he initially was talked about. Caleb Williams is number one. I don't think there's any debate over that. But I think for a guy like Drake May, who recently has been getting talked about sliding in the draft, he's one of those guys that I thought should have taken advantage of doing the passing drills and any drill that he could to try to boost his stock up. Because look at what it did for J.J. McCarthy, right? Like, J.J. McCarthy was originally talked about between like 10 and 20, and now we're talking like top 7. Yeah. So I think they're like, Drake May probably should have taken advantage of the combine so that he doesn't slide. Or slide Drake, 12. That's fine.
I like Drake, but I didn't love his excuse. He said that he wants to wait till his pro day so he can showcase some of his teammates as well. I mean, it seemed a little weak. But one thing about Caleb Williams is he was the last person to leave the field. He was talking to the event staff and all that. So he not only stuck around the combine, he was there interacting with people from all different levels, not just the teams that were going to be interested in drafting him.
And I think that with a guy like a JJ McCarthy, the reason why he would do that is to say that, like, to what Mike brought up, like, it was the range of 10 to 20. Like, that's like, and that was the reason why he went through it. The reason why Drake May, and why I feel like, if you're getting, all sorts of reports from your agent and, especially teams that you are going to be in the top 5 or even the top 6 or 7, I wouldn't necessarily want to do anything that's going to jeopardize that by any means. Frankly, I feel like the Drake May stuff is just more on the more on just the simple fact that I think people are over analyzing him just a little bit, but and that's that's their analysis. I don't want to hate on that one bit. I just think that for him, it's probably like he got tipped off, if you will, of this idea that I'm going to go in the top 6 or 7, which and we said before, like if you were to maybe say what's a worst case scenario for the Broncos, it's maybe not necessarily going 1, 2, 3, 4, but 4 quarterbacks going in inside the top 10.
But if you think about it, if a quarterback is afraid to throw, I mean, that should be just second nature to them. Yeah, I mean, how are they going to jeopardize their standing? Yeah. I mean, how bad could it possibly be? I just think that you owe it to yourself to do that. But again, they're going with the advice of people that are far smarter than I am and far more experienced on what to do at the combine. But I hope it doesn't become a trend where the players are not participating, in some of the more basic things that their position entails.
And actually one of the subtle things that I feel like maybe actually benefited this guy was, we talked about him previously in this episode, but Michael Penix, I actually feel like even though he couldn't run, the fact that he still participated in drills and actually threw, even if it was like made for him, like a made for him situation, because he loves to throw the football. Like, I feel like that's like a subtle thing that would win over teams like that. Cause it's just the little things, I feel like, right? It's just the little things like Roma Dunze, like Dunze was staying after the combine so that he could beat, his 3 cone drill of 6-6 or for whatever it was that he ran. Like he stayed after the combine. So and you hear people say it all the time, either in job interviews or or if you're first on the job, you're an intern or whatever. Like if you show up and you're the person who wants it more than the next guy, that alone will carry so much weight for organizations, companies, you name it, or even for NFL teams. So Odunze helped himself more, right? He helped himself more by doing that. Or even Caleb Williams staying a little bit longer after the combine helped himself more by doing that, especially given the off-field stuff with Caleb Williams, helping himself just a little bit more, so I feel like, it will at least benefits you. It may not hurt you, but it definitely could separate you from the top. When you put in that extra work, when you feel like, what, I'm a driven guy. And what's crazy for me is like the Odunze stuff or the Caleb Williams stuff is like, that's actually the first I've heard of a player or players actually staying after to do some extra work like that. That's the first time I've ever seen anything like that, which is crazy because these athletes, they live and breathe football, nothing but football or nothing but sports, and like, those are things that like when you're growing up as a kid or, you're Michael Jordan, like one of the things that made him so well, in the NBA and everything was like, he would shoot free throws constantly. Like he would make free throws constantly. Cal Ripken Jr., like he would go to the batting cages and he would hit, thousands of baseballs in the batting cages constantly, day after day after day. So
Tiger Woods.
Yeah. I feel like it does more to help you than hurt you.
Yeah, and I kind of like this comment, but I kind of want to change it a little bit, right? So, like, I think that there's a pretty good consensus on who's going to be a first-round pick. Like, other than 1 or 2 maybe surprises here and there in the draft, I think for the most part we know who the first-round picks are going to be. I don't think it would be an issue for us to not invite any first-rounders to the combine. Like, bring in people that we're not familiar with to come in and work out at the combine so they can raise their draft stock. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
That's so subjective, though, Mike. Like, you just can't. I don't foresee that would ever happen. Not to mention that there are other things, outside of what happens on the field where there's value in the players being there. Meeting the press, having the individual meetings with the with the teams, the medicals, the et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and again, I feel like they do that to a certain extent. And again, I feel like actually a comment like that is actually, or something like that could slander a guy like a Dylan Lowby. And again, I'm not saying, like New Hampshire's not necessarily like in the Alabamas or, anything like that, but it's still rather small school to where like, but
we're not Alabama.
Right. You're not Alabama, but like, there's a reason why Lowby got invited. Right. It's like that. There's a reason why Lowby got invited. It's because people feel like he's super, super talented to be considered for the next level. But also I think that like one of the things and this is something that they just started this year, and it is worth bringing this up. And even with the Senior Bowl, I think it's the first year that they're starting. Well, maybe it's next year, but underclassmen can now participate in the NFL Combine. So I feel like in the vein of having conversations of day 2 picks and more day 2 picks and day 3 picks, I feel like we're going to see a fair amount of those situations. And in fact, maybe that's a case because of the underclassmen. You see maybe more of the combine roster be expanded just a little bit more, meaning you could see some more smaller schools. I will say on a side story note of that, the NFL is doing something really cool with the historical black colleges, where they're doing an HBCU combine. So like where you'll send NFL coaches, they'll send them, or even NFL players, there to actually do an NFL combine with historical black colleges like Grambling, so I mean, like those schools like that. So it at least gives them the consideration. And maybe you could consider like the audition for the actual combine itself, but there's a reason why they do that, so that they can get that consideration as you look at those those small schools like that.
Do you guys know how many invitees there were to the combine this year?
Isn't it right around 200?
321.
So say it seems like over 3.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
So there are quite a few guys that were there that are not going to get picked.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about 256 picks, right?
Plus compensatory. So
do math. That's not fair.
Mike pulls out the toes. So.
Where's my calculator?
Math is hard.
Yeah, I think you're looking around 250, 260.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there. Anything else we need to talk about? Anything you want to bring up?
It's been a great show, great chat. Flew by. Thank you.
All right, I think we got everything covered. Again, make sure you tune in to mainly tomorrow with Lance and Carl. Got it right. They're going to cover more free agents. We covered more combine and Wilson replacements, but they'll break everything down as far as free agency goes. So make sure you check that out. That's tomorrow at 7:30 Mountain, 8:30 Central. So make sure you check that one out. Also, check out every other show that's on the network. We got shows Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the neighborhood will be back either when the Avs make the playoffs or when the Broncos play again. So make sure you go and like all those shows. And again, the biggest way to support this show is to hit the thumbs up. Cam, go ahead and do it. Yeah! Hit that thumbs up. Get the fireworks going. We would greatly appreciate it. That is all. We need to figure out what that is because I like that. I want to thank everybody in the chat. It was a lively chat. We love hearing all your opinions, your thoughts, your ideas. And again, after we're not live, you can go ahead and leave any comments you want. We'll respond as soon as we see them. So we'll greatly appreciate that. We love you guys. We love Broncos country. We love the Broncos. We'll see you guys later. Peace.
Fast lane when I pass in the street. Bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come down, so